The morning mist still clung to the jagged peaks when a faint scratching echoed against Thorn's sturdy door. He froze, his hand hovering over the coffee pot. 12 years he'd spent ensuring this cabin, nestled deep within the canyon's embrace, remained a secret. The sound came again, a desperate plea whispered on the wind. Bounty hunters, he reasoned, had long given up the chase. Settlers wouldn't dare trespass this far into Apache territory. The nearest town was a brutal 3-day ride away, yet the scratching persisted, a fading ember of hope. Thorn reluctantly set down the pot and reached for the rifle above the fireplace. A tremor ran through his fingers, not of fear but of an almost forgotten sensation, human contact. He'd meticulously constructed this fortress of solitude, stone by painstaking stone, severing ties with the world mile by solitary mile. Peeking through the narrow window, he saw only a cascade of dark hair and tattered fabric clinging to a figure slumped against the doorframe. Logic screamed at him to ignore it. Let whoever it was succumb to the elements. The old Thorn, hardened by betrayal and loss, would have done just that. But something about the fragility of the sound, the diminishing strength behind each plea, tugged at something buried deep. A flicker of compassion defying his carefully cultivated isolation. He unlatched the heavy door. She tumbled forward, collapsing into his arms before he could react. A young Apache woman, her long black hair thick with dried blood, her buckskin dress ripped and stained a gruesome crimson. Her breathing was shallow, her olive skin ashen from blood loss. Yet, even in her broken state, a fierce spirit radiated from her face, tightening Thorn's chest with an emotion he thought long extinguished. He should have left her there, closed the door, erased this intrusion from his life. Apache raids had become increasingly frequent, and harboring a wounded member could invite swift and brutal retribution. But as he cradled her fragile form, feeling the faint flutter of her heartbeat against his own, Thorn understood that his 12 years of running had finally led him to this moment. The pragmatic choice was to mend her wounds and send her on her way. Yet, as he carried her towards his bed, her fingers weakly clutching his shirt even in unconsciousness, Thorn knew this woman was a catalyst, a force poised to shatter his self-imposed exile. Gently, he laid her upon the rough woolen blankets, then recoiled as if burned. His hands trembled as he stared at the widening stain on her dress. He'd tended to wounded animals, even stitched his own bullet wounds during desperate times. But this was different. This was a woman, an Apache woman. Whispers of Apache ferocity echoed in his mind. Warriors who could track a man for weeks. Women whispered to be as cunning as they were beautiful, capable of both love and deadly wrath. Rationality screamed at him to abandon her. But watching the shallow rise and fall of her chest, those old stories felt like whispers from a forgotten nightmare. This wasn't a warrior, not now. This was someone's daughter, bleeding on his bed. Someone wounded badly enough to traverse miles of unforgiving terrain to reach his doorstep. Thorn forced himself to move. He heated water over the crackling fire and gathered his meager medical supplies, whiskey for cleansing, strips of cloth torn from worn shirts. His movements were mechanical, but his mind wrestled with unanswered questions. Where did she come from? Who inflicted such wounds? And why did her presence feel like a wrecking ball to his carefully ordered world? As he approached with the steaming water, her eyes fluttered open, dark brown, almost black. They locked onto him with unnerving intensity. Most would show fear upon waking in a stranger's cabin, wounded and vulnerable. But her gaze held something more. A sharp intelligence, a probing gaze that seemed to dissect his soul. She tried to sit, instantly wincing and falling back against the pillow. A soft gasp escaped her lips, quickly suppressed. Even wounded, she refused to show weakness to a stranger. Thorn recognized that stubborn pride. It was a shield he himself had wielded for years. "Easy," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse. "You're hurt bad." Her eyes narrowed, cataloging his face, etching every detail into memory. When she spoke, her English was clear, laced with the lilting melody of her native tongue. "You are not who I expected." Her simple statement struck him harder than it should. What had she expected? A wild mountain man, more beast than human? A mad hermit, quick to shoot before asking questions? He realized that in 12 years of solitude, he'd never considered how he appeared through the eyes of another. "Neither are you," he confessed, then regretted his words. A fleeting smile touched her lips before pain extinguished it. "I am Ayana, and you are the ghost man of the canyons, the one who vanished from the world." A chill snaked down Thorn's spine. If the Apache knew of him, knew his location, his sanctuary was breached. Everything he'd erected to keep the world at bay had crumbled. But before panic fully seized him, Ayana's next words stopped him. "They say you lost someone, that grief turned you into a shadow." Her dark eyes held no judgment, only a profound understanding that ached in his chest. "I know that pain." The vulnerability in her voice cracked something within him he thought irrevocably shattered. For 12 years he'd clung to the belief that isolation was strength, that needing no one made him impervious. But this wounded stranger saw through his defenses as if they were made of the thinnest glass. As he reached for her blood-stained dress to assess her wounds, Ayana gripped his wrist with unexpected strength. Her touch sent a jolt through his arm, a potent reminder of the humanity he'd tried so hard to suppress. "Before you decide to help me," she whispered, her voice weakening, "you should know that helping me will bring them here. They will not be so kind." The weight of her warning descended like a shroud. He'd spent 12 years meticulously crafting a refuge, and now this woman was telling him it was all for naught, that aiding her meant painting a target on his back that would never fade. Every survival instinct roared at him to drag her outside and let fate decide her destiny. But gazing into her eyes, growing fainter with each breath, something fundamental shifted within him. Perhaps it was her recognition of his loss, the shared hollow ache that had driven him into this mountain exile. Perhaps it was simply that after 12 years of only conversing with his horse, the sound of genuine human understanding was too precious to forsake. "Who is coming?" he asked, gently prying her fingers from his wrist to examine her wounds. "White men. They attacked our village at dawn, slaughtered the innocents first." Her voice was steady, yet Thorn detected a tremor lurking beneath the surface. "I was gathering herbs by the river when the screams erupted. I tried to fight, but they were many." As he carefully peeled back the torn fabric of her dress, Thorn found a deep laceration along her ribs where a blade had found its mark. The wound was grave, but not immediately fatal with proper care. He was more disturbed by the way she spoke of the attack, not with the expected rage, but with a weariness that spoke volumes about the horrors she had witnessed. "These men," he said, carefully cleaning the wound, "are they hunting you specifically?" A mirthless laugh escaped Ayana's lips. "My father was Chief Nalish. The soldiers seek to capture his family to use as leverage. When they could not find our village, they made an example of the smaller ones." The name struck Thorn like a physical blow. Nalish was a renowned war chief, celebrated for his tactical brilliance and his defiance against forced relocation onto reservations. If she was his daughter, aiding her wasn't merely dangerous, it was an act of defiance against the government. "Christ," he breathed, regretting the oath when he saw her wince. "You fear them?" she observed, studying his face. "That is why you live here like a wounded animal." The accusation stung because of its accuracy. Thorn had been running from his demons for so long that courage felt foreign. But something in the way she spoke, without judgment, only a somber recognition, sparked a desire to refute her assessment. "I fear what I become when I stop running," he admitted, the words surprising him. Ayana's eyes widened slightly. In that shared moment of honesty, a connection formed between them, a silent pact between two souls carrying scars too deep for superficial comfort. But before either could explore that connection, the distant drumming of hooves echoed through the canyon. Her hand shot out, gripping his arm tightly. "They found my trail!" Thorn rushed to the window, flattening himself against the wall to peer through the grimy glass. 3 riders cautiously navigated the narrow canyon path, their eyes sweeping the terrain with the predatory gaze of wolves. He recognized the rigid military bearing in their posture, the methodical manner in which they scrutinized every shadow. "Cavalry," he whispered. "Worse, bounty hunters in the army pay. They get paid extra for bringing in Apache alive." Ayana struggled to sit, despite her injuries. You must hide me. If they find me here, they will kill you also." The strategic move was plain. Hand her over, claim he'd found her unconscious, collect whatever bounty they offered. It would alleviate his immediate crisis, and perhaps even earn him enough goodwill to safeguard his location. He couldn't sacrifice 12 years of deliberate seclusion for a stranger, regardless of how deeply her dark eyes seemed to penetrate his facade. Yet as Thorne watched the riders draw nearer, a chilling familiarity washed over him. He recognized their breed, men who profited from the suffering of others, justifying their brutality with legal mandates, men like those who had destroyed his life 12 years prior. "There's a root cellar behind the fireplace," he said quietly. "Hidden panel. You can fit if you remain silent." Ayana's expression shifted from resignation to incredulity. "You would risk your life for someone you just met?" Thorne didn't answer. The hoofbeats were growing louder, voices carried on the wind, rough and confident, belonging to men accustomed to seizing what they desired. Instead of answering her question, he assisted her to her feet, supporting her weight as they moved toward the fireplace. "Can you stay silent, even if they search for hours?" "I have hidden from worse," she stated, but gratitude colored her words. As Thorne opened the hidden panel and aided her into the cramped space, their faces drew close. For a brief moment, the immediate danger receded as he found himself captivated by the determination in her jawline, the resilience in her eyes that defied pain and fear. She was beautiful, a fierce beauty that spoke of survival and fortitude rather than fragile elegance. "Why?" she whispered. "Why help me?" The question hung suspended, laden with implications neither dared to voice. Thorne considered several logical responses. Basic decency, aversion to bounty hunters, simple loneliness. But the reality was far more intricate, intertwined with the manner her presence had awakened something he thought extinguished. "Maybe I'm tired of running," he said at last. Before Ayana could respond, the sound of heavy boots on his porch announced their visitors. Thorne swiftly concealed the panel and moved to answer the door, his mind racing to construct a convincing story. But as he reached for the latch, a chilling realization dawned. The bloodied bandages and bowl of water lay in plain sight on the table. The bed bore the telltale stains of her injuries. And worst of all, a trail of fresh blood droplets led from the door to the fireplace, a beacon for any competent tracker. The pounding on the door grew more insistent, accompanied by a voice that demanded compliance. "Open up! Territorial business!" Thorne hesitated. In trying to save Ayana, he'd made a critical blunder, and now their lives hinged on the story he could concoct in the next few seconds. Thorne yanked open the door, feigning annoyance as if he had been disturbed rather than terrified. 3 figures stood on his porch, their hands resting casually on their gun belts. The leader was a man with calculating eyes and a badge that looked more purchased than earned. "Morning," Thorne said, partially blocking the doorway. "You boys lost?" "Deputy Marshal Clayton Briggs," the leader announced, making no effort to produce any identification. "We're tracking a dangerous Apache woman. The blood trail indicates she came this way." Thorne followed their gaze to the crimson drops on his porch, his mind working quickly. The evidence was significant, but not necessarily fatal if he could play this well. "Dangerous, you say? All I found was a buck with an arrow in its side. A deer." The second man, thick-necked and mean-looking, stepped closer. "That's a mighty convenient story." "Check for yourself," Thorne said, gesturing toward a pile of bloodied rags near his chopping block. "Been butchering it all morning. Meat's hanging in the smokehouse if you want proof." It was a desperate gamble, but Thorne had, in fact, been processing a deer he'd killed days prior. The timing couldn't have been more fortuitous, lending credence to his lie. But Deputy Briggs wasn't entirely convinced. "Mind if we take a look around inside? Just to be thorough." Every instinct urged Thorne to refuse, to slam the door and seize his rifle, but that would only confirm their suspicions. Instead, he stepped aside with apparent reluctance. "Make it quick. I've got work to do." The 3 men entered his cabin, their eyes darting around the room, cataloging every detail. Thorne's heart hammered in his chest as Briggs approached the table where the bloodied bandages sat in a basin of reddish water. This was the moment where his narrative would either hold or crumble completely. "Messy business, butchering," Briggs observed, picking up one of the cloth strips. Deer kicked while I was dressing it. Caught me with a hoof, tore my shirt up pretty good. Thorn rolled up his sleeve, displaying an old scar that could pass for a recent wound from a distance. Had to patch myself up before I bled all over the meat. The third man, silent until now, knelt beside the fireplace and ran his finger along the hearth. When he stood, his finger was smeared with blood. Thorn's stomach dropped as the man's eyes narrowed, following the trail leading directly to the hidden panel. "Interesting," the man said slowly. "This blood pattern suggests something was dragged across the floor, something heavy." Briggs moved closer, his hand now resting on his pistol grip. "You know, friend, I've been tracking wounded animals for 20 years, and this doesn't look like deer blood to me." The cabin fell silent except for the crackling fire. Thorn could feel Ayanna behind the wall, sense her holding her breath as death drew closer. "You know, friend, I've been tracking wounded animals for a long time, and this doesn't look like deer blood to me." The silence stretched taut, heavy with unvoiced threat. The men knew they were being lied to. Thorn felt the walls of his self-imposed prison closing in, 12 years of solitude about to end in violence and bloodshed. But something had transformed him since opening that door to find Ayanna on his doorstep. The man who'd spent over a decade avoiding confrontation was gone, replaced by someone who remembered what it felt like to fight for something meaningful. $50, Thorn repeated slowly. "That's what you value a human life at?" Briggs smirked. "Apache ain't human. They're animals that need putting down." He nodded to his men. "Search every inch of this place. She's here somewhere." The burly man lumbered towards the fireplace, while the third began to overturn furniture. Thorn watched these badge-wearing wolves desecrate his sanctuary. His hand inched towards the rifle hanging above the mantel. But Briggs registered the movement. "I wouldn't," the deputy marshal warned, his own weapon half drawn. 3 against 1 ain't sporting odds." "Depends on the one," Thorn said quietly. Something in his voice gave them pause. There was a predatory calmness about Thorn now, a chilling serenity that spoke of violence under tight control. The man near the fireplace straightened warily, realizing that the hermit they'd underestimated might be far more dangerous than they had imagined. "I think you're the type who's got a soft spot for sob stories. A bleeding Apache princess shows up with tales of woe and you forget what side you're supposed to be on." "Which side is that?" Thorn asked. "The side that murders children at dawn?" His words struck a nerve. Briggs's face darkened. "Those savages had it coming. They've been raiding settlements, killing good Christian folk. We're bringing civilization to this territory by any means necessary. It's hunting wounded women through the mountains like animals by any means necessary, and eliminating anyone fool enough to harbor fugitives." The standoff stretched taut, 3 armed men against 1, but something about Thorn's stillness made the odds seem less certain. The burly man near the fireplace had found the blood trail and was examining the stones, probing for hidden openings. Then, from behind the hidden panel came the faintest sound, a barely audible intake of breath as Ayanna struggled to remain silent despite the pain. It was so quiet that only someone listening would notice. But in the heavy silence of the cabin, it was as loud as a scream. The man at the fireplace froze, his head cocked to the side like a hunting dog. "There," he whispered. "Behind this wall, something's breathing." Briggs smirked, triumphant. "Well, well. Looks like our hermit's been keeping secrets." He kept his gun on Thorn while nodding to his men. "Open it." Thorn's mind churned, each option ending in more violence. He could attack, but 3 to 1 meant at least one would survive to hurt Ayanna. He could bargain, but these men didn't honor deals. As the men felt for the panel, Thorn made his choice. He had run from the consequences of violence, hiding from what he was capable of when pushed. But some things were worth fighting for. "You want to know what's behind that wall?" Thorn said, his voice carrying an edge that made them pause. "You're about to find out why I came to these mountains." The transformation in Thorn was terrifying. The hermit was gone, replaced by something lethal. His eyes went cold, and when he moved, it was with the precision of a man who'd killed before and would kill again. "You boys made one mistake. You assumed I was hiding because I was afraid." Briggs kept his gun trained on Thorn. It means I came to these mountains to get away from what I become when people push me." Thorn's voice was calm, which made it all the more menacing. "Years ago, I was an officer. I was a cavalry officer. Lost my whole unit to men like you. Badge-wearing thieves who sold army positions and got good soldiers killed for profit." The man at the fireplace paused, glancing nervously. "I tracked down every man responsible. Some I killed quick. Others regretted their choices." "You're lying." "Captain Thorn Shepard, 5th Cavalry. Look when you get back." The name hung in the air. Even out here, the legend of the officer who'd gone rogue was known. The man turning furniture straightened. "You're the ghost captain. They said you were dead." "Dead would have been easier. Rage kept me alive long enough to finish what I started. Then I came here to bury that man. You boys just dug him up." Briggs's hand was shaking, but he didn't lower the weapon. "You're outnumbered. Whatever you were, you're just a hermit now." "Am I?" Thorn smiled, and it was the most frightening expression any of them had ever seen. "Tell you what, I'll give you boys one chance. Walk away now and forget this place. Keep pushing, and you'll discover why they called me the Ghost Captain." The man at the fireplace got the panel open. Ayanna huddled there, blood staining her dress, her eyes wide. "There she is." Briggs stepped toward the hidden compartment. In that moment, Thorn became a blur of honed skills. The Ghost Captain had returned. Thorn's hand flashed to the knife on his belt, covering the distance to Briggs. The deputy marshal tried to respond, but Thorn was already inside his guard, the blade finding its mark. Briggs collapsed, shock in his eyes. The man near the fireplace fumbled for his weapon, but Thorn was already moving. A blow to the throat dropped him. The third managed to draw, but the Ghost Captain spun away from the shot and closed in. In seconds, it was over. 3 men lay dead on Thorn's floor, their blood joining Ayanna's. Ayanna emerged from hiding, favoring her side. She looked at the carnage, her eyes taking in the violence. So, the stories were true. The Ghost Captain. Thorn stood amid the bodies. "I tried to bury that man up here. Thought if I stayed away from people I could forget. But you cannot run from who you are, just as I cannot run from my destiny." They stood together. For the first time, he wasn't alone with his demons. "They'll send more," Ayanna warned. "When these don't return, others will come." Thorn nodded. "Then we can't stay here. We can disappear completely." Thorn met her gaze. "Unless you'd rather I take you back?" Ayanna considered it. "My father's war is not ending. You have already sacrificed your sanctuary for me. Why would you do more?" The question forced Thorn to confront his feelings. "Because, for the first time since I came to these mountains, I don't feel like a ghost." Something passed between them. They were both outcasts, both wounded by a world that had taken everything they loved. But together, they might find something worth protecting. As they gathered supplies, Ayanna touched his arm. "Sometimes we must lose everything to find what we need." Thorn looked at his cabin, then at Ayanna. Maybe they're right. They disappeared into the wilderness, 2 souls finding refuge when the world offered none. They left behind them the legend that bonds forged in blood could never be broken. The Ghost Captain had found redemption, and Ayanna had found someone willing to share her exile. They would write a new legend in the West. So, what's the heart of this story? It's about finding connection and purpose in the most unexpected places, even after experiencing profound loss. Thorn, a man haunted by his past, found his carefully constructed isolation shattered by Ayanna, a woman fighting for her people. And in choosing to help her, he didn't just save her life, he started to reclaim his own humanity. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in solitude, but in the bonds we forge, even when those bonds are forged in the fires of adversity. What did you think of Thorn's transformation? Or perhaps you have a question about Ayanna's future? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Let's get a conversation going. And if you enjoyed this deep dive and want to explore more stories of resilience, redemption, and unexpected alliances, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what we've got coming up next. Thanks for watching.